Welcome to the M2I Alternative Investments Chat, where we demystify the world of alternative investments and financing for entrepreneurs and investors alike. With these discussions, we hope you're more empowered to unlock opportunities in your business or portfolio. Hello, and welcome to another episode of M2I Alternative Investments Chat. My name is Erin, and this is Erica. And you might have noticed there's someone sitting in between the two of us today. This is our first guest ever on the pod. Welcome. This is Sandy Simmons.
Thank you.
He is a consultant, a business consultant with Pathfinder Partners, and you are an expert in real estate and DSTs, which we will dive into what a DST is on a later episode. But first, we're going to kick off our convo talking about real estate investing. So let's start with some of the fundamentals of investing.
Yeah. So Sandy, when we asked you to be on our podcast as our guinea pig, as our first guest, we had a conversation and we sat down and just to kind of pick your brain. So we talked about an owner versus a loaner. Can you tell our listeners what the heck that means?
Sure. Generally, stocks and bonds represent ownership or loaning. So you own a stock, you own the company, you're an owner. You can be a loaner. You're buying a bond, you're loaning that company the money, they're paying you some interest. Generally, there's better appreciation potential as an owner than a loaner. And it's very similar in real estate investing as well. You can be a loaner or an owner.
You own a house or you loan your house?
You provide the mortgage.
There you go.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about being an owner or a loaner, what are some benefits and drawbacks specifically in the real estate space?
Sure. So as anybody knows who has owned investment real estate, and we're talking specifically investment more so than residential.
Yeah.
People understand there's maintenance and you've got to pay taxes, but they oftentimes forget about things like liability, the bookkeeping that's required when you have an investment property. And in addition to that, just the general upkeep of the property is a big responsibility. As a mortgagee, what your primary goal is to receive income steadily, predictably, presumably at a good rate because you've loaned the money at a rate that you're comfortable with. Mm-hmm. And goal number 2, in this case, is to not own the real estate because you really don't want to foreclose on it. Mm-hmm. You want to make sure you loan the money to the right individual and that you don't really want to become an owner. But it does happen. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the loaners become owners, unfortunately.
Yeah. So if we're talking to an investor, what do you think makes them nervous to invest in real estate?
Well, there's a number of things that people will tell you. The illiquidity of it. Mm-hmm. I forgot to mention in our last quick discussion there that there's a sort of a funny saying in the business, the terrible T's, the 3 T's.
Oh, yeah.
Trash, toilets, tenants. And people get a little afraid of wondering how they're going to manage a bad tenant, right?
Yeah.
Are they going to get the call in the middle of the night? The toilet's backed up.
Right.
So those kinds of risks are something that scare people. And then sometimes it's the illiquidity, the illiquid nature of real estate. And I think we will probably address that a little bit later, but those are the common fears. What's going to happen to my property? Who's going to take care of it?
Yeah, because we talk about this often in other episodes that, you can't just sell a house in the middle of the night in your pajamas. Be like, never mind, I don't want this. I need a little bit of extra money. It takes time. And so that can be a really scary thing if you have to sit on this property, and especially you have to look at all kinds of factors, like even the housing market. Like right now, houses are so expensive, and I can't imagine what a commercial space or an investment space looks like. And trying to get rid of that, if you need money, I'd be scared to invest in that as well. So
yeah, there's definitely risks that come with the illiquid side of commercial real estate. But what would you say to someone who's nervous if you were trying to encourage them to invest in commercial real estate or invest in real estate as an investment? What would you say to them if you were trying to encourage them?
Well, first and foremost, makes for an excellent diversifier in any portfolio of investments because real estate generally doesn't coordinate with the markets. Correlate is the word, the correct word.
We like coordinate too.
It doesn't correlate with the market. So the stock market may be going way down and your real estate will be holding its value.
Yeah.
Another reason to think about is an inflation hedge, right? Not everything is a good inflation hedge. Generally, real estate is. It tends to go up as inflation goes up for any number of reasons. But the fact is that it's a tangible asset, whereas a stock or a bond is a piece of paper.
Right. Yeah, totally. So if we're starting to talk about real estate, I think that it makes sense for us to dive into some of the asset classes that exist in that space. Could you walk us through a few asset classes?
Be happy to. There's any number of them, but the main ones that usually pop to mind are multifamily, hospitality, like hotels. We'll get to those. Self-storage, and in some cases, senior housing. So let's launch with hospitality hotels. There's a very good rule of thumb in real estate investing that if you want to hedge inflation and it's an inflationary environment, the length of the lease determines what you're going to own. The shorter the lease, the more often you can raise the rents, keep up with inflation, hedge the inflation, and in fact, increase the value of your property. In a recessionary time, you want the longest lease possible because now you're getting a rent check that's stable, secure, long-lasting.
So that's why they change the rates every
day on a
every
hotel.
day. It's like one day it's $50 and the next day it's $500. You're like, how did that happen? I thought I'm getting the same room. Now that makes sense because when people want it, they want to raise that rent because they can.
Exactly. Exactly. Supply and demand.
I'm on to you, hotels.
In a hotel, ideally, you're getting the shortest possible lease because it's overnight, which means you can change it with the dynamics of the economy. Good way to inflation hedge something because you can raise the rates literally overnight. One thing about hotels is, unlike many forms of real estate, it is an operating business. So you have to keep in mind there's a lot of moving parts in the air with an asset like that. Self-storage, something a little bit different, but we all need a place to store our stuff, right?
Some have more stuff than others.
That's true.
Exactly. And here's one it's clearly not a hotel, but now the leases are suddenly 1-month leases. So you can't change them all the time. But if you have good tenant turnover, you are changing the leases all the time. They just happen to last a month or so. Steady demand for them right now. It's a good inflation hedge. They generally want them well located in neighborhoods that are jam-packed full of people with stuff.
Yeah.
Burbs.
The burbs.
Yeah, really. Which actually is a great segue into really ideally you want to have a storage facility next to a brand new big multifamily apartment building because that's where the most storage needs occur. Now, here we've gone to another asset where the lease is a little longer. Now you're looking at a year, maybe 2, right? So you can't change them as much, but you've got a steadier tenant in that case. Obviously in hotels, they're overnight.
Right.
In apartments, they're a year or 2 or 5 or whatever it is.
Right. And I think we've all experienced when you sign a lease for a year and then you look to renew and, oh my God, my rent has gone up by $500 a month.
Yeah.
How did this happen?
Yeah.
What happened? But I like that you said that self-storage needs to be next to those kinds of operating because I know, when you move, sometimes you can't get a space that used to accommodate all of your stuff. Now, when you think about self-storage, like overhead, because you mentioned about the hotels that you have to remember it's an operating business and there's things that have to go on in there. What about self-storage?
Well, self-storage is probably the simplest asset class for management. The saying is you need a broom and a light bulb.
Yeah. Doesn't need to be air conditioned.
Somebody
heated,
moves
nothing.
out.
Yeah.
So yes, you do have climate controlled, but essentially somebody moves out, you sweep the place out, you replace the light bulb, and in comes the next tenant.
Right.
So it's a very simple asset to manage.
You don't need to repaint the walls.
No.
do the carpet. That's really cool. That I could see myself, owning some self-storage, just thinking about it.
Something interesting about that we have not talked about is that whole industry has moved to a very low employee need. They are all managed by computer now, literally. If you go to your storage facility, how many people are in that office every day, right?
Yeah.
Maybe one.
Not many, yeah.
And they don't do anything except call you when you don't pay your rent. But other than that, it's all automatic. The gate's automatic. Everything's automatic. So from an economical standpoint, the management and self-storage is also quite inexpensive. Room and a light bulb and a computer. We'll add that.
Yeah, there we go.
I love that.
What are some other ones?
Yeah.
Well, we talked a little bit about multifamily. Let me first lump it together with senior housing. Okay. So
Sorry, did you just call me old?
no, I live in one of those. I speak from experience. The buffet's at 5. No,
We'll be there.
So essentially you have a multifamily housing. Senior housing, isn't it the same thing? Well, it is. It's just for older folks. The main difference now goes back to what we've been talking about, particularly like hotel, is that you've got a situation where the senior housing is an operating business, and depending upon the kind of senior housing, it could be an intense operating business. Because you may have memory care, you may have long-term care, you may have a lot of medical stuff affiliated with that property. So that makes it actually very different. Many people lump them together, senior housing, apartment. They're not. They're very different assets. Yeah. But the great word today is demographics, which is what is driving the demand for a lot of these kinds of real estate. You can't get enough apartments. Look at us around here. You can't look anywhere in this city and not see a crane building an apartment building.
Right.
Literally right down the street from where we're located. Yeah. There's a brand new, beautiful building going in.
Yeah. And life expectancy continues to increase. So we have more demand than ever for senior housing. And we need a nice place for these people to live. Hopefully, as long as you care for, your seniors. But, more demand.
No, but if you drive around the valley, even right now, I'll see something being built and I'm like, that is so beautiful. I wonder how much those apartments are going to be. And I look it up and it's a beautiful it's like for senior living. I'm like,
yeah.
I think they would notice.
I think you have a few more years before that.
Because they're gorgeous. You're right, though. They're like these beautiful complexes.
They are. And a sort of a corollary to that, which we also didn't really talk about, is student housing. Student housing is a huge asset class for investment purposes because the demand for college boarding is overloaded. There's really no state university in this country that can provide enough on-campus housing for their students. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah, I've experienced that.
Did you live on campus when you went to college?
I did for 2 years, but there's huge demand. And ASU, we live very close to ASU, and ASU has been building like crazy.
Yeah.
And they have bought up so many of the privately owned multifamily residences that have been around and have been converting it to student housing because they have such an overflow of students that they can't accommodate. So ASU's been experiencing that.
Yeah. Well, what reminded me of it, you talking about these gorgeous new complexes going up, you ought to see some of the brand new student housing stuff. It is.
You mean you don't have to share a bathroom with 15 girls? I didn't, but I had a suite mate where I had to share a toilet and a sink with. It was only 4 of us, but when everyone needs to be ready at 8:00 in the morning, it makes it slightly different.
Sure. No, thanks to COVID, that has changed the construction of student housing now. You can charge a lot more when you've got a 5-bedroom complex with each has their own separate bathroom.
Yeah.
Right. So student housing has not only grown to that level of convenience, but it's not unusual to have the 75-inch flat screen on the wall for all the tenants.
You want to go back to college?
Stainless steel. Oh,
we got nothing else going on. Might as well.
I'm telling you, ladies, this stuff is so much nicer than anything I ever lived in college.
I know. I'm like, it kind of almost sounds nicer than my apartment. I'm like, wait, now I'm going to go from senior living, if I can pass as an older, and now I'm going to be like, ooh, like Drew Barrymore. And what was that horrible movie where she has to go back to school and or like 21 Jump Street.
Yeah.
I just won't be undercover. I'll just, be there.
Yeah. No, it's really true. It may as well be a student or a senior because the housing is so beautiful. But
that's awesome.
There, as I said, the senior housing is more of an operating business type of real estate, so it has its own challenges.
Right.
But speaking of operating business real estate, we were going to move on to restaurants, but I know that you and Erin used to work in the restaurant management business.
We did together.
Why don't you ladies tell us about that?
Back in the many, many moons ago. No, restaurants I've always found extremely fascinating as an asset class. And I worked for one restaurant group for 13 years. In fact, where I met Erin, and then I moved to a different restaurant group, and they actually had investors. And I was like, I don't get it. How do you make money on that? Because you have to build some of them, or when we were talking about leases and long-term leases, I know at our previous company, one of our establishments had a lease for 99 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
99 years.
It's a long lease.
Like, you have to, what happens if the business goes under in year 75? Like, maybe they have a great run, but like
75 years.
75 years, and then it goes off. So, you have to be really, really particular on where you're putting these restaurants, because they need to be in high traffic areas. They need to be where the demand is. You're not going to put a pizza place in between a Papa John's and a Pizza Hut, although I don't know Pizza Hut. I love Pizza Hut. Lord. But you have to think about where you're going to position these restaurants. And how do you, when you sign a 99-year lease, what do you really get out of that?
Well,
what
you as the renter get a place where you know that your restaurant will be able to stay because you've secured a long-term contract, and you as the owner of that building are securing long-term income. So that's a benefit of it. But you're right, Erica. We live in Phoenix where the restaurant scene is booming. Feels like there's a new restaurant every week. And we have seen really high-profile restaurants coming to the Valley. Catch, to name one. We have Elefante that just opened, which we're really excited about. I know. Yeah. That's where we should go to lunch after this.
All right.
But some of them don't make it. We've had some really high-end restaurants that are really good, great concepts, but they don't last, and for a myriad of reasons. But sometimes, they can't keep up with the rent because they are located in a really high rent area that if they're not getting the amount of business that they need to sustain that rent, then they can't last. So it's very interesting to observe that.
Yeah, but you also, just like in senior living, you have to take into account you have to pay for the food. To serve somebody food, you have to buy food to prepare it. There's so many, and you want to talk about light bulbs, toilets, tenants, and trash. Mm-hmm. Oh, don't get me started on trash. If your trash company doesn't come and pick up the trash, it is a nightmare, because then your parking lot starts to stink. Or if it's located in your building, like, you can't have a restaurant that smells like garbage.
Yeah. That
or backed up sewage, or
all of those things. People don't want to eat there. And also it costs so much money for the equipment that's needed to run a restaurant. So that's another piece of it. You're talking about, all sorts of specialized ovens, and, we don't have to get into the weeds on that. But, when you go to a restaurant, they're not using an oven like you have at home. These are industrial.
Microwave. Yeah. Remember that commercial? The microwave. Yeah. So.
Yeah, they're not using those.
So it's the essence of the operating business.
Yeah.
I would argue that restaurants probably aren't a real estate investment first. They're definitely a business investment first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They just happen to need a place to be.
Yeah.
Which we'll talk a little bit about life cycle in a bit. But that's a perfect segue into single tenant net lease properties. Net lease, triple net lease is the phrase used when the tenant not only rents the property, but they pay for the taxes, all of the maintenance, and the insurance on the property. It can be ideal for the investor that owns it, because what do they have to do?
Right.
Collect the rent, keep the books.
Yeah.
And and good examples of that would be Tractor Supply or Walgreens or CVS,
Yeah, but
Fresenius,
what's Fresenius?
Dialysis Center.
I think Sonora and Quest. Like,
Yeah.
Exactly. And those similar to what you were talking about, where they're going to have a 30-year lease, right? The owner of that property is getting the income, but they're more of a loaner than an owner in this case, because the appreciation potential generally isn't there in the single tenant net lease space.
that makes sense. But you brought up like Walgreens and CVS, and I read recently that, they're closing a lot of those. So what does that do for the loaner if your single tenant leaves? Like, they've taken care of the whole property. So what does that mean? Do they get to keep collecting the money if you have a 30-year lease?
Yeah. Well, as the owner, your tenant has to pay it whether they're in it or not. That's the risk and drawback of those long-term single tenant net leases, because they decide to close the store for whatever reason. The demographics have moved away, or it's in the sticks. It's the other side of town that got hot for whatever reason. In your example, if it's a corporate lease, so it wasn't a franchisee, and Walgreens are all corporate, but in this example, they still have to pay that lease until their attorneys can figure out how to get out of it, which you can do.
Sure.
You can just negotiate it, okay? But the reality is that you as an owner are now stuck with an empty property that is configured for that kind of business.
Yeah.
And so if you want a new tenant, you either got to find one that does that, or you're going to have somebody that come in and demand huge tenant improvement.
Right.
From you.
Right.
Well, we'll move in, but you're going to have to move this wall, and it totally changed the inside of this thing. So
Right.
that's some of the risks of the single tenant triple net, but a good credit quality tenant is critical for those, right?
Yeah.
If it's Sandy's nail shop, you better be charging me a really high rent, and I'm not going to be maintaining that place.
Yeah.
So different risk profile, but nonetheless, credit quality tenant. By the way, I would be a credit.
I didn't doubt you for a second.
Well, I just need to specify, is it nails or nails? Because in my head, you said Sandy's nails, and I'm going, all right, sir, take a look at these bad boys. See what you can do over here.
We're going to put you to work.
All that pocket change you think I have is actually roofing nails.
You bring up a good point, though. It reminds me of this video that Erica and I both happened to watch. We were chit-chatting about it. On CNBC, they did a feature about the Arcade Mall in Providence, Rhode Island. And this is one of the oldest malls in the country. And like so many malls and other brick and mortars like Walgreens, a lot of them are closing because of the competition with online shopping and other things that are affecting their demand. And they actually have been transforming, doing what you said, right? Knock down that wall here, do this. They've been transforming that space so that the third level of that mall has actually turned into apartments. So they don't have, the typical, all the things that you might have in an apartment, but it's transforming the space, which is pretty cool, finding a different use for it.
Yeah, I would love to live there. I mean, they can't have a stove with an open flame, but I mean, half of us DoorDash or Uber Eats or go out to eat anyway, as how we live right now. Why wouldn't I just go downstairs in my pajamas, make friends with I know that when we watch that video, there's restaurants, there's bars, there's a tailor in there, there's
a bookstore.
What's that?
A bookstore.
There's people to do your hair. I mean, it's a small, really cool community. I would actually, the apartments were itty bitty, like 200 to 500 square feet. But like, if you're only going in there to sleep and shower, what does it matter?
Right.
If I can go down and sit, grab a cup of coffee, sit down in the bookstore, I think it's genius. And it keeps a piece of architecture alive within a community that, like you said, it's the oldest mall in the Americas.
Yeah. It's pretty cool.
I think it's way cool.
Yeah. And that you'll see that happening quite a bit in slower economy, or they call it repurposing, right? An example that always comes to mind was in Shreveport, Louisiana, where I actually spent some time. There was an old mall, and it was a classic mall where it was basically a big center, wings that came out, but it was all indoors. Well, it died a slow death, and a very large church bought it, and it was pretty much perfect because malls have big air conditioning units, and that's the most expensive part. So now they go in, knock down the walls, and they have whatever area they need for the kids, for the main church, and so forth.
Yeah.
And the apartment buildings now, they're starting to look at the empty office space that's out there because, as you've seen in all of the newspapers, office space is crazy. After everybody started working from home and COVID, and a lot of developers are looking at changing those into multifamily. But it's a lot more problematic than the mall situation I just mentioned because, remember, in an office building, you still have that one or two big HVAC units. Now you're making each of those offices an apartment, and it's got to have its own unit.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So the costs become somewhat prohibitive, but there's people doing it. If there's money to be made,
they're going to figure out a way to make that money. That is for sure. So when we talked earlier, while we were prepping for this episode, we talked about, and you mentioned it as well, the life cycle of real estate. Describe what that means to our audience here.
Well, I think as a real estate guy, real estate is always going to be in demand. And if you frame it in terms of your life, okay, when you're born, you got to be somewhere. You got to live somewhere, right? Where were you born? Well, we were in a piece of real estate called healthcare, hospital, right? As you get older and you finally break away from the family, you got to get an apartment. You need real estate, right? If you go down a typical path where you have a family, well, now you need bigger real estate and more room, and then suddenly you need a place to store all your stuff. So now you got a storage unit. And, a nice business trip. Well, now you got to go sleep somewhere else and you need more real estate. And then ultimately one day, we kick the bucket and we still need real estate because you got to get buried somewhere.
Yep.
That's true.
Right?
So that the real estate demand is constant throughout our lives, pretty much in every activity that we do.
I think we need to include that in. Isn't the saying that there's only two things constant in your life, taxes and death? I think we need to put real estate in there somewhere because you're absolutely correct. We always need to have somewhere to live. Even after death, we have to be put somewhere.
Yeah. Laid to rest.
To rest, exactly.
Yes. So thank you, Sandy, for coming on the show. I love what you said about real estate being a tangible asset that can provide some diversification and portfolio and also a sense of security. And also the potential for appreciation is really exciting. And also income generation. If you are that owner and you have someone who is paying you that rent, you have that passive income, that is a great opportunity. And also having that inflation hedge, being able to play your cards right, gives you some flexibility there.
No eggs all in one basket, as we always say. No eggs all
in one basket. Exactly.
No. But there's the one thing we haven't touched upon is what happens when you sell that real estate that you made so much money in? Uncle Sam is knocking on your door.
Oh, no.
Not
Uncle Sam.
That pesky man.
Well, I have a feeling you're going to tell us more about that in our next episode.
Yeah, so stay tuned as we discuss how or learn more about what happens when you sell that piece of property that you've been making that money on.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Stay tuned for more insight on our next episode, and don't forget to subscribe to continue the journey with M2I. See you next time.
Content provided in this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as professional, financial, or investment advice. This podcast should not be construed as an offer to sell or a solicitation of any offer to buy any securities. We strongly recommend that you seek advice from a qualified professional before making any financial decisions.